We've talked about some policy implications. One of the things that has started really in 2016, 2017, you started hearing a lot about universal basic income. Can I get a raise of hands? Who's heard the term universal basic income? So most of you have heard it. It's this really, it actually encompasses a number of different ideas, some of which libertarians love and some of which sort of progressive liberals love. And and they're very different. But there's a lot of these questions around if work is changing, if there is less of it or less of it that if we're using the same economic structure today, we're still not paying for certain things, et cetera. So what about UBI? Is that something practical? Is that something we ought to be thinking about in the next couple of decades? Or is that one of these pie-in-the-sky ideas that isn't really ever going to come to fruition?
Let me put the pro case out on the panel here. So we voted on this in Switzerland. I live in Geneva. We voted on this in Switzerland last year, and it didn't go through, but 23.5% of the Swiss population in the referendum, it's a direct democracy system, said, yes, we think that the federal government in Switzerland should provide every citizen over a certain age a monthly stipend, regardless of your income level, that is completely unconditional and guaranteed. Can't be taken away from you, is not taxed, and is not taken away. Now, you can still have progressive taxation measures to account for that. And there have been, many concerns about how you pay for that. That was one of the reasons why the referendum didn't pass. But I think that there are three big reasons why we should be considering and having this discussion. The first one goes to this point about security, economic security and uncertainty. We seem to be entering a world where there are systems are changing and sources of uncertainty for people are growing larger. There are huge issues at the moment for people who are on welfare systems around the world, including in Switzerland or Australia, where I'm from originally, where essentially you get a marginal tax rate of around 80% the moment you leave different forms of the welfare state and you start working for yourself. You can imagine that an unconditional basic income would solve a lot of those problems of security, of economic security, by removing that uncertainty in terms of being able to earn at least, say, 50, 60, 70 cents of the next dollar you earn above that basic income. The second big issue here is really around, what the Republican version of freedom. I don't mean Republican by the party, I mean Republican by the sense of what does it mean to be part of a republic. What is it sense to have really freedom to choose and freedom to not to choose, to be empowered to not to be empowered, etc., to have to make own decisions over your life. And by by removing some of the elements that are more paternalistic about the state, by particularly means testing that basic income, by making it unconditional, you actually do give people the decision, do I want to spend time with my kids, do I want to spend time investing in education, or do I want to earn that extra dollar? And we don't make the arguments that, why is Bill Gates still working even though he's a billionaire? We do make the argument for people at the other end of the spectrum, well, why aren't they working more? Partly there's some structural elements there. And I think the third element is really also a social justice question. If we're moving into really a world where we want to be more inclusive and our visions of technology are more inclusive, we need to find ways to distribute and the benefits of these systems more than just the ability to have more storage space on your Gmail, right? Like, it's not just about I can give my data up and get Facebook for free. I'm willing to pay $15 a year, which is what Facebook gets from me through advertising on average. I'm willing to pay for that rather than have my data being used in different ways. You get empowered with more choices in different ways by having this kind of social justice element to redistribution. But these are hugely political issues, and the affordability question, I would argue, is a political question at the end of the day. And so we have to kind of grasp with this socially and politically. But anyway, that's my rant over.
Do you want me to talk about affordability, or shall we listen to Rachel? Okay. So there's roughly 40 million people in California. If we say there's about 30 million people that would get this universal basic income, who are adults, and the poverty level income for a single adult is $12,300 or something like that, and so I'm just going to round up to $13,000 a year. Let's be generous. So $13,000 a year for 30 million Californians, that comes to $390 billion every single year. The general fund right now is somewhere between 120 and 130 billion dollars. So if you don't want to completely cut that out, then you need to quadruple the amount of money that the state takes in, which, if you can figure out how to do that, that would be awesome. On the other hand, the US can't even, so talking about security, two of the main things that drive people to economic insecurity are healthcare and housing. We can't even solve our housing problem, even though everyone says that it's a problem, and even though people could make money off of building more housing. We also can't solve the healthcare problem, even though there's all this evidence that it saves us money, that it keeps people from dying. And so, until we can solve these issues, universal basic income sounds great. Like, I would love it if it actually happened. If we actually even halfway solved healthcare and housing, that would get rid of the need for a lot of this universal basic income. So, sorry to be a downer.
Rachel, did you want to comment on some of the different ideas you all have had around UBI?
Yeah, so one of the dilemmas I think of UBI is that, if you look at the existing wealth inequality in the world and then you add UBI to it, there's still tremendous wealth inequality. So if you think of the Oxfam study around the eight most wealthy individuals own more than the $3+ billion at the bottom end of the financial holdings. So that exists, and sort of take that plus UBI, and we still have a very challenging system. And I think from a foresight and futurist perspective, you always want to look at. It feels to me like that's sort of a constraint scenario. I think is probably out of those four that I mentioned. And I don't know what the transformation scenario looks like, but it would be interesting to do the thought exercise of where does UBI fit in those four alternative futures, and how would you define the others?